Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com. You've joined us for an episode on the crimes of the Three Ruffians, or is it the crime of the Three Ruffians? As we examine this with Brother Jason Short returning as our guest, we're going to be looking over the ritual, talking about some of the written analysis that surrounds these Three Ruffians to gain a better understanding of their role as a central figure in the Hiramic Legend. But before we get to that, welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, Brother Short.
Oh, thank you, Brother Michael. I'm really excited to get into this.
Me too. It's always interesting to get a fresh perspective, I think, on one of the oldest stories in Freemasonry, which is the Hiramic Legend. And I feel that by the time a Mason gets to this point in their journey through Freemasonry, you're like, who is Hiramic Legend? What is this all about? And the explanation is they'll say, well, it's an allegory. And then some brothers would say, well, it's an allegory within an allegory. So for the purpose of this conversation, I'd like to kind of cover this as like a CSI or police investigation drama show look into it. So the facts are, we're told in our ritual that of the 80,000 fellow crafts employed at the building of King Solomon's temple, there were 15 craftsmen who entered into a plot to obtain the secret word of a master mason from Hiramic Legend. In that allegory, each of the ruffians represent tyranny, ignorance, and intolerance, which are three of the most hated enemies to all Freemasons. That's everything that we're kind of told sitting through and observing what is basically a play that unfolds from the Hiramic Legend. As someone who's gone through this as an experience and then also, I'm guessing, participated in degrees for your lodge or maybe visited other lodges and have observed the ritual, what were your initial thoughts on the ruffians?
Well, there's several. Several. The first was like, as in my first introduction to it, I wanted to know where from the Bible they would have pulled it, because the first two degrees are pulled from Chronicles and Kings. And so when I found out that the ruffians are completely made up, that this is an allegory on top of the two other degrees, which are rooted in the Bible, it just opens the door to so many questions.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting you said that, because my first impression was in the preparation room getting ready to go through and kind of being told, like, this is what's going to happen. Try not to react. Keep your feeling. And then all of a sudden I'm like, what is going on? I felt like I was being attacked, honestly, as you're going through it. Like, you feel like you're getting mugged.
Literally.
In Old English in some instances. And then I'm sitting there going, well, what was the whole point of that? Like, why did they do that? And I never really started researching the Three Ruffians' role until I actually had one of the parts in a degree after I became a Master Mason. And then, like you, I was like, who are these guys? Where did they come from? Because so much, as you said, of our ritual can be traced back to texts either in the Old Testament or other sacred volumes of law that exist. But these guys were just a mystery. And the more that I started going down that rabbit hole, and we won't get into this discussion tonight, but just as a side note, like, there was a large portion of time where the Three Ruffians didn't even have a name.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I mean, from the first, I think the earliest record of them is actually Newsboy. It was like 1723 was the first reference of them, but they weren't, the first recorded degree wasn't until 1725. And even then, back then, we know that they weren't necessarily named. They don't get a name, or there's not a name published until 1760.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I started to notice when I was going into it is there's a lot of variation in that time period, and we kind of see what I'm looking at with these guys was that the third degree in itself was something that de Sagulaire and Anderson must have come up with after forming Grand Lodge to either a give more reason for gentlemen masons to feel like they've accomplished something, the reward for learning the craft, and something also in the time of enlightenment that allowed brethren to feel more on the level. Prior to the establishment of Grand Lodge and prior to the introduction of the third degree, when there were only the apprentice degree and the fellowcraft degree, the master mason was the master of the lodge. Um, when when we look at the when of like I love the idea of looking at this as sort of like a crime scene. It's like, so when was the crime committed?
Right.
This is the time of enlightenment. This is a time of the great like leveling of the playing field, the great the liberty for or liberation of so many men, and so part well getting into the Three Ruffians, but just in the degree itself is sort of giving passage into this new uh era where a master mason could be anybody in the lodge. You didn't necessarily have to orbit through all of the chairs to become the master. If
Right.
you had a solid understanding of the work, you could get there.
Right. And I think a couple points. I love this discussion. I'm super excited about this. Um, I think a lot of brothers, especially when they have a part in the third degree, they spell or they feel that the ruffian is spelled RUGH, like you're roughing somebody up. And
Mm,
that really isn't the role of the ruffians. The ruffians are trying to obtain something that they're not worthy of having.
mm,
And no matter what jurisdiction that you're in, there's going to be variances of how that is said during the ritual. But that's basically what they're told. Like, you can't have what you're seeking. You're not worthy to have it.
mhm.
The work isn't done yet.
It's neither the time nor the place.
Right. All of those things are said, and it irritates them through each stage to where they go from basically just being, hey, I think I can just walk up and in modern days it would be like somebody come up and being like, hey, brother Short, hey, can I get the password to your computer?
Mm.
Well, why do you need that? Well, can I get your bank account number? Or, just when we freely give away personal information, now there's this question that goes like, well, are you worthy to have this? I don't just give this to anyone. This is my credit card. Be careful with it.
Mm.
That's how I think of the ruffian part. And for me, this conversation originated after a recent third degree with my lodge here in DC, where we were talking about how, the way that I was portraying second base, as Masons would know, was not to come up and grab and be forceful, but to kind of sidle up and be like, hey, why don't you give me this thing?
Mhm.
I'm your friend. And that's when I started getting into who are these guys?
Mhm.
What was the role of the ruffians, and why are they there? And to go back to the ritual, we know, as it's stated, that there were 15 craftsmen who conspired, but that went from 15 to 12 because 12 decided not to stay involved.
Mhm.
And 3 were. And we don't know what happened. You can only speculate here. So in the presentation that I put around the crime of the ruffians was, what was it? I took it as, and I'm sure we've all been in those situations at work where it starts with chatter. It kind of starts with a whisper. Somebody's like, oh, that person got a promotion and I should have got that job. And they should be paying me more. I should be getting this. I should be getting that.
Mhm.
And they usually attract like 1 or 2 other agitators. And then maybe you can get a group that rallies around it. But at some point, this group disbanded because somebody came up with the idea of, hey, we're going to try to get this thing that we're not supposed to have yet. And if we have to, we might kill a guy. It
Mhm.
might come down to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing with it too is like, so what are the crimes that are getting committed here. One of the other first things, well, two of the other first things that pop up. First, sidebar is that the going from the 15 to 3, leaving the 12. My mind immediately went to the zodiac. So
Mm,
here we see some numbers that we know have some cosmic significance. And I know we want a table talking about like the names and it's for another time. And so maybe we'll talk about the cosmic relationship later. But the crimes themselves in like the Three Ruffians, w we know that one of them represents ignorance, one of them represents prejudice, and one of them represents greed, but they're really like the anti-wardens, you know? They're the they're the anti-Mason. It's like, what is the worst thing that could happen if you practiced Masonry in the completely wrong way?
right. Yep. I honestly I couldn't have summed it up a better way than saying they are the antithesis of bad Masons. You hear so much in Blue Lodge that we need to guard the West Gate, and I think the Ruffians are a perfect example of why we also need to guard the South Gate. Because not giving any secrets away here, but if Hiram Abiff is supposed to be the junior warden of the lodge, and the junior warden of the lodge represents a brother who is like everybody else, who has shown the dedication to go through and begin that path or journey to the east to become the worshipful master, then we as brothers of the lodge have a responsibility to make sure we're not pushing or forcing or allowing people into that first chair of a pillar officer's cycle unless they are worthy to be there. And to me, that's always been a takeaway that I've had every time I've watched The Third Degree, is that having spent a significant amount of time in the South as a junior warden, that's your job. You represent Hiram Abiff, the everyman. And I think
Mhm.
that's what the original, as you put, anti-wardens, our ruffians, that is what they disliked so much about him, was that he was one of them. He was a man of Tyre. He was just a simple common person who was able to hold audience with kings in a very important setting, and they weren't. They
Mhm.
were below him, but only
Absolutely.
in their minds.
Absolutely. And I mean, we know that Hiram basically dies because of his integrity. Um, and to his last moment, he maintains the values that he has learned and perfected in order to advance into the chair of junior warden until his last breath. And that becomes a crime. What's interesting about the drama too is it's not just one crime that's committed. It starts to really snowball.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah. First of all, the ruffians were not good masons. They were horrible fellow crafts. If you look to see what it's required as you're building your symbolic temple as a Freemason, you could sit here and go, okay, just start with the seven liberal arts and sciences. Did they actually have a working grasp or concept of that? No. Listen to how they talk, their grammar, their rhetoric, their thought process. It's half baked. They sound like street thugs when
Mhm,
they are approaching Hiram Abiff.
mhm,
I'll give them some bonus points on arithmetic and math. They seem to have that. They definitely knew how to construct a grave and bury somebody. They were very clear on that one. Logic, I think that they had a little bit of that because they realized, like, hey, we got to plan this escape route. We need to go here. Let's come back here. Let's try to get out of the country by evading this way and that way. But like most criminals, they get caught because they're also stupid.
oh, yeah. I mean, it's th they I don't know if they expected to kill him. I think that their plan was like, "Oh, we're just gonna shake him down, we're gonna get the word, and we're gonna, get out of Dodge."
Right,
That's why our first 2 don't actually commit the act. But then I
right,
know a point that you're really keen on is our 3rd ruffian, is perhaps the mastermind. Is he just the muscle? Is he the mastermind? Um, I don't think he going back to being the bad Mason, like one of the things, uh, when we look at the tools that they use to attack Hiram,
Hmm.
our first ruffians using the 24-inch gauge, our
Yep.
second ruffians using the square, and our third ruffian is using a tool that isn't ever presented anymore as a working tool, which is the setting maul.
Right.
Uh, in the research that I was looking in to it seemed like at some point the setting maul was part of the working tools of a master mason, and that it had the power to um, both be constructive and destructive. That not only was it an instrument to break away stone, kind of like the common gavel, but also an instrument of death when wielded in the wrong way. And we,
Right.
we clearly see that demonstrated here.
Yeah, in modern times, the setting maul is that little tiny, almost like a rubber mallet, is what we would describe it as now, to set literally a block or a stone or something in place. You wouldn't use an actual hammer or
Mm,
mallet; you would use that. And you have to think about, when you look at the real crime, was what are they guilty of? They killed Grandmaster Hiramic, and they confessed to it, and they told you where the body was buried as they were being let out and executed in the way that they described. Oh my gosh, I need to be
sure.
killed this way.
I think that the most honorable thing they do is coming forward. And that's when they've actually made the change because the real thing at stake here is truth. It's honesty. That what these guys are doing is a dishonest act. The integrity is the truth that Hiram stands for. And in the moment of killing him, the next thing that they do is now they're trying to cover it up. They're trying to cover up their lie.
Right.
Get trying to get out of town. They go and try to flee by sea and lie again.
Right. And they get caught, and then they confess, and they're gone away. And you just hear screams as they're punished. And then you sit there and go, okay, let's rewind this ship here.
Mm,
When I first walked into a lodge, I was told we're building the symbolic temple of King Solomon. But then I'm told, oh, it's a symbol because I'm the temple and I'm okay. So I need to get, my foundation set. Okay, got that. Then I'm going to walk through a flight of, oh, now I'm a fellow craft and I'm working on the central tenets, the figure parts of me that make me the man of who I am. And now I get to the inner sanctum sanctorum, the third level, the third degree of Master Mason, and I don't even get to see the ending of the temple being finished because these guys show up, and not only do they kill the Grand Master, the foreman, for lack of a better term, but now we don't even get to know the secret word of a Master Mason. It's
mm,
lost until future generations can discover it.
mhm.
Talk about a wrecking ball. These guys, and I think that as this would be parts where I wish that I could go into, and I'm sure it was a candlelit room and they're writing with pen quills and, octopus ink in their pens or whatever. And to hear them brainstorming how they're going to use all of this symbolism to tell this story, because what was the main point that they were trying to convey
Mm.
to the audience at that moment, because so much is happening and you're trying to put all of this together and reason it. And is the big question that you walk away with, okay, so if I don't get to see something finished, does that mean that it was never completed?
You know, uh, funny, funny that that's the sentiment you get because you're not alone in that. There's actually criticism that's been published in the early and mid 1700s after the conferral of this degree by Masons who are criticizing de Saguilar and Anderson for this, that it was such a departure from scripture, and that it was also somewhat of a departure from kind of what was understood. Like there was some confusion in the craft almost. And we see how long it took, even into the 1800s. There was uh it can be seen that there was a lot of controversy controversy around it because there were people who didn't even really know A, that they had names by the 1760s, um, but B, exactly what it was. So my hypothesis about the crime is also that not only did it take so long to come to fruition, but that the idea that perfection should have been the third degree and that the real perfection is actually imperfection
Mm.
took took a little bit of time for people to catch on to. But when you think about it, and something that I know you presented in your lecture is that the temple is never finished. Like we don't finish the temple until we literally put down our working tools.
Yeah, and I don't want to leave the audience hanging there because I don't share that viewpoint. I think what we see, and this is where I feel like after the third degree, to me, the two most important nights to talk to a new brother is once they're obligated as an entered apprentice, like, hey, what did you think of that experience? A little weird, huh?
Mm,
Like, let's talk about it. Like, we'll go in the parking lot and hug it out. Like, what? Let's ask all the questions, man, because I tried to tell you it's not what you think it's going to be, and
mm,
it's completely different, right? Okay, cool. And then by the time they do the second degree, you're like, oh yeah, it's a lot like the first degree, but a little bit longer. Some things change. Okay, cool. Then they do this third degree. And I think the biggest myth that exists with a lot of new Masons that sometimes carries over, if this is where the Masonic education stops for that brother, is that Hiram Abiff was a real person, which he wasn't, and that these actions or this incident took place, which it never did. It's also thought that, oh, well, then King Solomon's temple never gets finished. Spoiler alert, it does. You can read that, and we know it is. And it's also kind of interesting when you go to the Yorkite body because their story begins with the fall of King Solomon's temple. So as a Mason, you actually never really get to see it, at least in those two, in Blue Lodge and Red Lodge, you never really get to see the finished or have it explained to you. In Scottish Rite, some of the degrees they have get a little bit more into it, so you understand really what the temple is, and it gets a little bit deeper, which that's what I love about the Scottish Rite degrees. But for the purpose of this conversation, no, I don't believe that because you don't see something finished doesn't mean it is not complete, because that wasn't the intent of the Three Ruffians. The Three Ruffians was to show you, in my opinion, that for you to get to this point in your Masonic journey, you were tested.
mm,
Not necessarily as a Freemason, as a known Freemason. You were tested throughout your life. You
mm,
had your own trials. And what the lesson of the Three Ruffians is that it will continue through life. But the good news is you have this whole arsenal, this weapon, your working tools that can defend you, that can protect you, that can enrich you, so that you're not put in those situations. Maybe it can become an avoidable circumstance or situation for you. But the main thing is that, yes, in order for you to be raised and given the substitute word, as we would say, for Master Mason, you had to be a complete fellowcraft, which means your temple was finished. Unfortunately, the King Solomon physical temple, you don't see that done. But I feel that and when I have this conversation, usually it's with brothers in the parking lot or upstairs or downstairs, depending on where the bar is afterwards, is don't feel like this is where your story ends, because it really is just beginning. Now you have been raised to the sublime degree, and that's where we get into what do those words mean on an esoteric level. And then I'm like, and go be one with the force, my brother. Go find the thing that's going to bring you enrichment in your life, and then come back and tell the rest of us about it.
mhm.
Go seek that light.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's
It's a
good
lot of
advice.
heavy lifting, and that's why for this particular presentation, when I give it in lodges, And brothers will be like, okay, oh boy, brother RC is about to die. Hey, can you keep this one under 30 minutes? I'm like, I'll try, guys. But it does open up the discussion and it gets you thinking. And if anything, hopefully for a brother that now is going to go and witness more third degrees, now you're looking at it in different ways. And I think that that was also the big takeaway, is that as we got kind of bring it back home here, they're central. The Three Ruffians are central in the Hiramic legend because their job was to be the disruptors. It's to make you think. They are shaking the tree and you are falling from it and trying to figure out what all of this means. And hopefully you land on your feet and you head down the path that you need to go to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean they are definitely representative of all the dangers that you will face in the world, Mason or not. I mean, they're kind of the, you know, the not just the anti-Masons, they're like the anti-liberty. You
Yeah.
know, I
They're
know that.
everything that we're told would be an enemy of Freemasonry, and why we're told in the first degree to be cautious and guard ourselves and be careful with our actions. And you're sitting here going through all of this, just being like, okay, that's great advice, thanks. And then hopefully all of these little lessons begin to connect the more time you spend in lodge, and actually, as I would say, working with the ritual, because this is what happens. You see, every time I see a degree, I come away with a whole new idea or perspective on something. And like you, I run to the internet, I run to my little Masonic library behind me, I reach out to friends and I'm like, what are your thoughts? And this is what brings me back to lodge every month and every year, and why I'm a Freemason, because I'm constantly trying to seek the light and improve myself. So that's what I think the job is of the Three Ruffians, is they are disruptors. They're changing the story.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. I really like that. I I kind of wish we had hours, you know, to really get into this, because I mean, you know, that's also a sentiment that Pike shares, and he kind of goes into a little bit of specifics as to what he thinks the ruffians represent. Hall has his own uh interpretation. Steinmetz. Everybody kind of gets into this. I think this is another one of those Masonic keystones that any brother who's interested in um, even just getting into the history of our craft, this is one of those things that'll make that pursuit a lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable, because the rabbit hole is very deep here and there's so much to dig through, and it becomes very exciting. I mean, the places that this led me just in the last um month or so of just diving specifically into this is I've been everywhere. I've
Good.
been everywhere
Yeah.
with it. And I gotta thank you, brother RC is very it's brought a lot of light into my life. And I know that any brother interested, it'll bring them a lot of light as well.
Cool. No, I'm excited to have a conversation with somebody that is engaged on this topic, because I'm one of those guys that after my lodge I'll go upstairs, that's where our bar is, and start talking about something, and then that little circle starts to form, and it's like, oh my gosh, where is he going with this one? What are we talking about? Where's this journey going? And the other point that I would say, and this would be for a much larger, and we will definitely set up time, we got a whole rest of the year to talk about this. But I think the other part of the Three Ruffians, when you really get into like an esoteric, deeper part, is that each man comes into Freemasonry asking an internal question. And the more brothers, or sorry, interested gentlemen or candidates or prospects or whatever the term is that your lodge uses, visitors, the more of these men that you interact with, you begin to start detecting themes, and that their question is very similar to the same question that you asked. Because why? The first place we're prepared to do this is in our heart, and then our brain kind of syncs up and catches it. And the cool thing about the third degree and the Hiramic legend is that it really pulls open the curtain, and you realize, hey, the question that I was seeking, I already knew the answer to that. I knew what it was that I was looking for. The cool thing about Freemasonry and going through these 3 degrees, a good man becoming better, is that now I have the confidence to embrace that as a truth and a confidence to move forward to become that person or to do that thing that I was seeking for. And when we talk about the secrets of Freemasonry, everything that we've talked about tonight and we'll talk about in the future, as you know, many men have written about it. It's all over the place on the internet. But when you start having these larger discussions, in my mind, it's like a scene from the movie Inception, man. Buildings are moving inside of here.
Oh yeah, man. There's lightning. It's yeah, man.
Well, this has been probably one of the deepest episodes that I can recall of having on our Craftsman Online podcast. Big thanks again to my guest this week for coming back, Brother Jason Short. Thanks for coming back, Brother Jason.
Pleasure. Anytime, brother.
If you've enjoyed this episode as much as we have and you want to hear more, you can just tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. You know, we're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.